Well, hello, welcome into another Tailscale talk, another live stream here on the Tailscale YouTube channel with me, Alex. I am a developer advocate here at Tailscale, and today we're going to be looking at some of your questions as they come in the live chat. Of course, you can just pop the questions down below. I will see them, hopefully, at least. How are you guys? I hope you're doing good. I see a couple of familiar names in the live chat already. Hello, Grish. Hello, Josh. Nice to see you guys. It's it's been a busy week over here. We've got a company offsite meeting next week. So we are all scrambling to get 2 weeks worth of work done this week before we're all out next week. So I'm sure anybody that's been on holiday or vacation from work will appreciate the scramble that's been going on this week in Tailscale Towers. We've got a video coming up next week on Synology. So for those of you that are in the Synology space, we are going to be releasing a video on how to install Tailscale on Synology, do auto updates, that kind of thing. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how that one's received by the community, because we have, I think Synology is one of our biggest install bases. Makes sense, right? Because Tailscale is a really easy way to connect devices together. So why wouldn't people that want to access their data from their house that aren't at home, why wouldn't they use Tailscale to do that? It was actually my first touch point with the Tailscale product, was actually using it on Synology. So we're going to jump into some stuff today related to Home Lab. We might get to some Nextcloud and Docker stuff as well towards the end. But specifically, I want to share with you guys my screen, because over here, can you see that okay? What's it picking up on the screen? It's showing you Proxmox. I'm not looking at Proxmox. Display capture. Yeah, that all looks right. OBS doing OBS things, I guess. Let me try and just hide that and then bring it back. Does that help? No. Okay, I'm going to add another video capture. Well, we want display capture. And then, there you go. Hopefully I'm not exposing anything I shouldn't be right now. OBS. Yeah, there we go. All right, so that's now working. And if I just resize this on the fly over here, put it behind the the overlay. Oh, I don't understand OBS sometimes. It just does weird stuff, and you can prep as much as you like, but OBS will make sure that you have an interesting live stream. All right, let me just crop this corner off my head. There we go. All right, so we're going to jump into, like I say, some home lab stuff today, I think. Specifically, we're going to be looking at clustering Proxmox together because I've just built a new series of devices using the Proxmox, using the Dell small form factor, 1 litre PCs that you can get for about $100-ish off Dell Refurb. So what we're looking at here on the screen is my PyKVM setup in my rack in my home office next door. So I have this room where I record all these videos, and then my real home office is next door. And in that rack, overlay needs, yeah, I know. I think Grisha fixed that, but so what we can see here, I'm booted into the BIOS of one of those systems, and I'm connected to it in a web browser, thanks to PyKVM. I know I've talked about it on the channel quite a bit, but this just never ceases to make me feel like I'm living in the future. So we're going to install Proxmox on this node right now, live on stream. What could go wrong? I see some questions coming through in the chat. Thank you very much, folks. We'll get to those in a little bit. This is hopefully where the Dell box now reboots and boots from the USB stick that's plugged into its USB port. Lovely stuff. Proxmox installer. Here we go. Live on stream. I see a question that came in from Lester, which I'll pick up now whilst it's booting, actually. So this question is asking about performance characteristics, I think, of Tailscale. Tailscale is fast already as it is, but are there any extra tweaks we could do to increase the latency for streaming desktops, for example? To be honest, we ran a performance test on the last live stream 2 weeks ago, and the performance engineering team took a look at that live stream, and a lot of the performance comes down to the acceleration capabilities of the pipeline end to end. So that can include all sorts of things, but one of the more common bottlenecks I think that we see is the UDP acceleration, or the lack thereof of UDP acceleration capabilities in residential firewalls and that kind of thing. So I'm not entirely, we haven't quite got to the bottom of the thing I showed a couple of weeks ago, specifically where we were routing packets at 4 or 5 gigs a second without Tailscale and about 1 gig a second with. But the working hypothesis, at least, is that my UDM Pro, my residential gateway, is the problem in that latency there. So another thing you can do, really easy thing you can do actually, is just try and make sure that you've got a direct connection between those two hosts. So if you type Tailscale ping on the command line, you want to make sure that it's a direct connection. It's not going through a relay or anything like that. You'll know it's direct because it doesn't say DERP NYC or something like that. We have a few relay servers across the world that traffic might bounce in and out of and relay through. That can cause extra latency sometimes as well. So I hope that covers your question, Lester. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with my screen capture in this scene either. So I'm just going to spend a second and fix that in the screen capture with the live chat as well. There we go, I think. Yeah, there we go. You guys can see the chat and Proxmox now. Fantastic. Okay, so I hope that covers off the question about latency. It's one of those topics that you just have to experiment with your settings. Tailscale itself is really just a transport layer with obviously some NAT traversal features and a bunch of other, fun stuff built in for identity management and that kind of thing. But when it comes to performance, really it's a question of, it's down to the hardware and the UDP acceleration that the gateways in the traffic flow in the route from A to B that they can actually do. All right, well, we seem to be into questions already, so let's just jump into that because it is a relevant question here from Jeroen. Did I get that right? Who knows? Let me know in the chat if I did. I can feel a sneeze coming on. Not ideal for a live stream, but there you go. Jeroen asks, is there a bandwidth limit when not directly connected on the Tailscale side? It's not so much as a limit as it's a quality of service limitation. We provide the DERP relays as a free service for every Tailscale customer. And so from our point of view, if we didn't put some kind of quality of service there, we'd end up horizontally scaling across most of AWS probably, given some of the traffic that we're proxying for people. So we would always recommend direct connections wherever possible. And there are different types of NAT that get in the way that can make that more difficult. Let me bring up a blog post, because on the Tailscale blog, we have a really... When I first started at this company, I read this blog post as part of my interview process. And this blog post, truthfully, is one of the most enlightening pieces of tech literature that you will read if you're into networking. And I'm not just saying that as a Tailscale employee, because I found that as part of my interview process, that I just learned so much from this blog post about how NAT traversal works. So if you are experiencing relay connections where you're not expecting them, take a look at this blog post, because there might be it might shed some light on what's going on for you, and like how to figure out how Tailscale's punching through certain firewalls and things like that. But for the most part, latency, as I say, comes down to the devices that are in the chain somewhere. If you've got two devices on the same LAN, for example, and they're both on Tailscale, they'll just connect directly locally inside the LAN. They won't hairpin out anywhere. And so the latency there will be limited by your local network gear. And the same is really true across the wider internet too. Of course, you have so little control about the pub. Once the packets leave your firewall, it's a wing and a hope and a prayer, honestly. And it's, TCP/IP is amazing that it works as well as it does, I think. So, all right, it was a good question. Where is my chat? Where's my question control gone? All right, cool, over here. All right, let's have a little look at this chat then. Is there a bandwidth limit? Yeah, we've done that one. Yes, actually, Guarav puts a really good point in the chat here, talking about, I use Tailscale Funnel for sharing my image, self-hosted photo backup server. I face issues with large videos. Photos are perfectly fine. How can I improve the experience? Don't use Tailscale Funnel. Would be the simple answer. So again, I'm going to link to one of my own resources. On the Tailscale YouTube channel, we put out a video fairly recently talking about Jellyfin automated remote access. This is a comprehensive beginner's guide to getting started with a self-hosted VPS that's running, in the case of the video at least, it's running on DigitalOcean. And what that does is that acts as your entry point into your Tailscale ecosystem. So rather than proxying through Tailscale Funnel, which is quality of service rate limited, so that every other customer on that DERP server doesn't get negatively impacted by your video stream or in photo upload or video backup, that kind of thing. You have your own essentially dedicated ingress point into your ecosystem. Now, the advantage of doing it this way, like we show in this video here, is that you are able to adverts. You are able to control the bandwidth completely. So DigitalOcean give you a terabyte in and out, I think, cumulatively across a month. And what you can do with that is use that as your ingress point. So in the video, there's a bunch of stuff about name servers, buying a domain. You know, the code snippets, by the way, for all of that stuff are in the video code snippets repository on screen just here. So if you go to Tailscale Dev, the GitHub organization, you will see all of the source code that you need to spin that solution up, Guarav. It's about as easy as I could make it when things like Terraform and Ansible are involved, I think. So please try it out. Let me know in the comments of that video or send me a message on Mastodon. I'm at ironicbadger at techhub.social. I should probably have a Tailscale facing thing, but I don't really. So there you go. Good questions coming in here, folks. We're not going to get to my my Proxmox clustering stuff. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Okay, let's take a look at what else is going on in the chat. Thanks for your answer. I will look at the blog post. Yeah, good stuff. Jeroen. My name is better pronounced as Jerome. Okay, yes, that makes much more sense. I assume that there was a typo involved there, or at least I hope so. Okay. So Bramble asks, does that local traversal you talked about apply when the two devices are on separate subnets? Well, the answer depends. It's all to do with the routing between those networks. So we're talking about layer 2, and layer 3 different bits of routing here, but it really depends on what layer your switches are operating at and how they pass packets between the various subnets and VLANs you have configured. I can't give you a definitive answer in this particular situation, but the answer is yes, maybe, no, maybe. It depends. So you have to know what your network topology looks like in order to know how the packets are routing between those VLANs. Whatever that looks like, Tailscale will probably do that anyway. What I will say is that one of my former colleagues actually had a pair of containers that were isolated in the Linux kernel, and they physically couldn't talk to each other. They're on the same physical box, but they couldn't talk to each other over TCP/IP directly. But Tailscale underneath, and we were as surprised as anybody when this happened. Tailscale underneath was able to make a direct connection between those two instances because it worked out some kind of in-memory way of doing it. Like we were very confused. So sometimes the magic of the NAT traversal stuff will just blow you away and be like, how is it doing that? And sometimes we don't even know. So there you go, Bramble. I hope that helps. A need I have here, this is from Paul Junecat. A need I have is having a GUI for the access controls. Being able to visualize links between other hosts would be so helpful. I want 3 machines to talk to one and not each other. Well, I think this comes hot off the heels of a video that we did fairly recently talking about ACL basics. This is a hot topic inside the company, let me tell you. We're a fairly small company, sort of 100, 150 people, something like that. And, you know, for us, it's a question of where do we've only got limited resources, and where do we expend them? And for us, there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that with some of our larger customers and the features they need, we have to support their requests. And then also we have to balance that against keeping the free product, you know, moving forward and all the rest of it, because we recognize that that's a really important entry point for a lot of people into the Tailscale ecosystem. So we hear you loud and clear on the ACL GUI. I cannot make any promises, but I promise you, at some point on one of these live streams, I'll get the product manager for ACLs on, and you can ask that same question to them directly and hear what they've got to say about it. Thanks for sending that one in, Paul. D Rohit asks, can we host our own DERP server? Technically the answer is yes, but we limit it pretty heavily to enterprise paying customers only. The reason for that is it's not really designed, architected as a public-facing service. There's a lot of Tailscale specific stuff going in there. You'd need an integration engineer to help you deploy it ideally. You can get in touch with our sales team if that's something you absolutely need locally. But until then, you can just use our free publicly hosted DERP servers to fulfill your DERP server requirements. Oh, I'm sorry, there's some lurgy going around in my household this week, and I think just talking is bringing it to the surface. So, okay, Josh Voiles writes, are there any additional security concerns hosting a VPS that accesses your Tailscale network? Yes and no. I'm aware I missed it depends so far today, but you can lock down as much or as little as you want with regards to connections with ACLs. So you can lock things down based on port, protocol, source IP, destination IP, user, that kind of thing. So theoretically, you're putting a VPS out on the public internet that's got a route back into your tailnet and can directly connect to every other device on your tailnet. I mean, that's the definition of a mesh network, right? But the plus point there is that pretty much is the same as every other device that you've got. Like, you're doing exactly the same thing with your phone. You're doing exactly the same thing with every other server, because it's a mesh network. Everything can talk to everything. But the security concerns come with, well, what if that VPS gets popped for some reason, right? What if somehow someone's able to SSH into that box, and then they've got keys to the kingdom much more easily and ingress routes back to the rest of all my infrastructure without having to do a whole bunch of island hopping or other configuration, because a simple Tailscale status will show every device in your tailnet. Well, my answer to that would be turn off the public part so much as is possible. Like, most infrastructure providers, most cloud providers, give you a method of having a firewall on your hosts. So you can block port 22, you can block everything that you want to block except for maybe port 80 and 443. There might be a couple of UDP ports you've got to pass so that Tailscale NAT traversal works happily. That'll be in our documentation. By the way, I think I've come across that previously. You can't block quite 100% of everything just so that the UDP packets can get in and out properly. But from a security perspective, you can then just connect to that VPS over Tailscale. So you're using Tailscale SSH to connect into that box and then get to wherever else you need to go that way. So the answer is yes, there are some minor risks, but I don't actually consider it as a particularly dangerous threat model, allowing a VPS into my tailnet. What I do is I make sure that I tag those nodes. So rather than being owned as Alex, as the user that owns your tailnet, I try and make sure that I tag them so that you can be very explicit about the connections that node can make into and out of the cloud environment that you have. Great questions. Ooh, all right. So Tony Boston writes in, enterprise use case, I guess. How would you go about routing when we have, say, a proxy for customers that cannot actually reach everywhere, but then also have one for employees that's more open? Well, we have a few different things in DNS level. I don't know if that's explicit enough for you, but you can have split DNS route to different name servers. So, I mean, that could be an option for you. Let me show you how that works in the Tailscale admin console over here. So under DNS, for example, at the bottom, you have this option to add a name server here. So if you go down to custom, I need to scroll up a little bit, don't I? So you can see that. So if you go to add name server and then custom, you can put, whatever domains, whatever your DNS server is in here. I don't know, 192.168.1.1, whatever. I made that up. And then you can restrict it to a specific domain. So you can actually kind of abuse this to do specific hosts, even if you just have one host that you're trying to proxy this way. So you could have, nextcloud.demo.com, and no matter where you are in your tailnet, that URL, that fully qualified domain name, will always resolve to 192.168.1.1. You could point that at a pie hole, at an AdGuard home, a DNS mask, at an unbound server. It doesn't really matter what is on the other end of this, so long as it's routable by the tailnet. So this IP address 192.168 is of course a local address. What you could do is put a subnet router in that remote subnet, and then have a DNS server listening on the local LAN subnet IP address, so that all those clients in that remote subnet can actually get DNS whenever they're on let's say the Wi-Fi of that house, for example. And then you, as the remote person, can also get into that remote DNS system when you match the split DNS configuration. This is actually, I'm going to bring up my personal tailnet, because this is how I manage and have managed for a long time to have 3 or 4 different sites all configured in Tailscale across multiple different physical geographies. So, yes, you guys can see that, right? So you can see this here is my personal tailnet, alexktz@gmail.com. And under here, you can see I've got gg.ktz, I've got git. So there's a few services here, for example, This is my local DNS server running in this house. Same with Nextcloud as well. And same with WD. So, that point, everything under those wildcards points to 1042.0.253. But I've got a couple of other sites as well that I want to route traffic for. I've got GG for my mum's house, and then NR for my mother-in-law's house, where I've got a couple of offsite backup things going on. And I really wanted to make sure that their networks continued to work, even if Tailscale went down for some reason, or I wasn't around to fix it. They're in a 5-hour different time zone. I'm not going to be awake half of the day for them. And the last thing I want is for them to be waiting on me to wake up to fix their internet. So those sites are fully self-contained and fully self-deployed, but using the split DNS feature inside the Tailscale admin console, I can route traffic from here to there as if I'm in the physical building. So let me just show you that in action. If I go to opensense. Let me do GG. Oh, I'm on a different tailnet. Oh, my heart stopped for a second then. Let me just connect to the right tailnet on this particular laptop. And then the moment I do that, you can see I can actually just log into opensense, which is where the Tailscale client is running in that remote subnet, as if I'm physically in that building thanks to the split DNS. So, bit of a complicated answer, but DNS is one of those things that if it was easy, they wouldn't pay us. They wouldn't pay us IT salaries, would they? I suppose. All right, let's move on to something else. I hope that was the correct answer for you. All right, so I'm a little bit behind in the chat. You guys are knocking it out the park today. That's fantastic. Let's have a look. Should we show the clustering? I'm going to make sure that my Proxmox install is proceeding first before I get to any more questions, I think. Because I wanted to make sure that Proxmox is installed today. So for those of you that came in a little bit late, I am currently installing Proxmox via PyKVM on one of those little Dell small form factor 1 litre PCs in my office next door. And because that's going to take a little while, I want to get that going whilst we're answering some other questions. But there's nothing too terribly, special about what's going on here. It's just a Proxmox install. My brain failed for a second then. I'm trying to think about too many things at once right now. So this is in a VLAN. I suppose I could talk a little bit about VLANs too at some point if we want to do that. But I am just going to do this as a static IP address, I think, and then it's going to go ahead and install Proxmox in the background whilst I'm talking. We are going to cover off probably clustering in Proxmox before the hour is up. So we're already half an hour in. We've probably got another half an hour to go, I think, or maybe longer. We'll see how it goes. I've got water this week. Last time I didn't have water. Okay, so Shagonda writes in. Where is Shagonda in my little overlay selector? There it is. Shagonda writes in, I have a VM with a DNS server on the tailnet. Can we make all machines on the tailnet use this DNS server, even with systemd resolv.d? Oh, you had to ask about systemd resolv.d, didn't you? That is the... Systemd, okay, this is a really contentious topic in the Linux world. And my good friend Chris Fisher over at Jupiter Broadcasting has convinced me over the years that systemd is a force for good generally. I think it was a necessary evil in so much as that it created a standardized interface to deal with the Linux underpinnings of system management, of service management, and dependency, like boot up dependency management, effectively. Whereas before we were reliant on things like init scripts and custom this and custom, and like distros used to actually be quite different in how they handled different parts of the configuration. But these days, pretty much every major distro is running systemd and GNOME, and it's just all a very homogeneous block of distributions. I think that's one of the reasons that some of these newer things like NixOS, for example, Nix technically isn't new, but it's come to popularity in the last year or two. Fedora, what's it called? Core UBlue or CoreOS. Like there's two different variants there. One is for the desktop, one is for server side. All sort of born out of this CoreOS idea, really, of an immutable operating system. Anyway, how did I get onto immutable operating systems from talking about DNS? I do ramble sometimes, flipping heck. You can see that, by the way, the Proxmox install has proceeded just fine in the background. I just love PyKVM, don't you? Like, before, can you imagine trying to live stream this with like a camera pointed at a monitor like we would have done in the old days? Gosh, that would have been awful. And at least this is somewhat legible. I'm going to get my updates done first of all. I'm suspecting here I've put the wrong DNS server in because my apt isn't working. So let me change. What is my DNS server? I can't even remember. I just have it on here. When is it? Oh, I see. Yep. Does that work now? Maybe if I just give it a quick reboot. All right, so coming back to the question, talking about systemd resolvd, the answer is yes. Systemd resolvd, I think, runs a local DNS server on the node itself. So you've got to find a way for that to end up overriding and using the Tailscale DNS. I'll be honest, I don't know the details off the top of my head. I know I kept you guys waiting for a while, rambling and prattling on about systemd and immutable distros, but I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head. So maybe for the next stream, Shanagonda, I will talk to you a little bit about systemd resolvd. How about that as a promise? Alrighty. Okay, this is a follow-up here from Turon. We talked a little bit about the ACLs and a VPS already. I've configured my ACL so that the VPS can only access specific IPs and ports. Is there still a security risk with this setup? I don't want to tag the VPS since I need access to a shared device. This is a great call out. Thank you, Turon. So one of the limiting factors that Turon is referring here to is when you have a shared device in your tailnet. So let's say I share a server with you, for example, from my tailnet into yours with node sharing. I'm sharing it with you personally. So this talks a little bit about node ownership. So what I'm talking about here, I'm going to jump back into my personal tailnet again because in there I do have some shared nodes and I can kind of illustrate the point a little better, I think. So in my personal tailnet here, you can see I've got a node here called Moose, which is currently the status of that node is shared in. I've shared that from another tailnet that I manage for the Jupiter Broadcasting podcasting network, where we the identity provider that we use for that network is GitHub. So my user here, Ironic Badger at GitHub, sent my other Tailscale tailnet user of alexktz@gmail.com an invitation to share that node. And so the sharing happens between those two nodes, between those two users, sorry, not through tagging or any other mechanisms that you might have in place for identity of those nodes. So one of the upshots of that is that you don't have a way of controlling access to devices in quite the same way that you do if they are natively on your tailnet. And so what we might recommend in this situation is rather than sharing nodes in, if you have the ability, add a user. Use an authentication provider that lets you, for example, like GitHub, have multiple users in the same organization, and then you can manage users that way. So for free, Tailscale will give you 3 users within a single tailnet. So if it's just you and a couple of buddies, that will cover off everything that you need. If you need more than that, we've just launched the Tailscale Personal Plus tier, which gives you up to 6 users and still 100 devices per user as well for, I think it's $5 a month or something like that. So if you need more than 3 users, you can pay just a little bit of money and get the Personal Plus tier. As for whether it's still a security risk, that really comes down to your threat model. If you are doing everything that you can to reasonably mitigate the risk, which it sounds like you probably are to Aaron, then maybe some kind of intrusion detection might be on the cards, or some kind of alerting when SSH connections pop up. You could also, in your access controls, this just occurs to me, for example, if SSH is the main worry, rather than have the action here as accept in your ACLs, can you guys see that okay? Let me make that a little bit bigger. In the SSH section of your ACLs, for example, rather than having accept, you could have check. And what this will do is it will force the SSHing user to re-authenticate through your identity provider every time they establish an SSH connection. This can be a little bit frustrating in a home lab situation, but if you are of a tinfoil hat wearing persuasion, or you just want to be absolutely belt and braces sure, you can then set, I think it's check period. Let me just double check in the SSH reference here. Check period. Yeah, here you go. You can select the check period to be every minute, every hour, I think default is 12 hours. So it really depends on your threat model as to whether it's secure or not. And that's not really an answer I can give. Mr. It depends. It's not really an answer I can give you verbatim, but it really is up to you to decide whether that fits within your threat profile and your threat model or not. All right, let's jump back over here. Thanks for asking that question. These are some great questions today, folks. I had a bunch of stuff prepared, but we haven't needed it so far. And I'm really enjoying this live chat. Let's see what else we've got. Scott Blair asks, can you use PyKVM on a laptop? Well, if the laptop has an HDMI out that mirrors the internal display, yeah, don't see why not. All it's doing for me is it's capturing HDMI input on my, this is where I film videos, for example. I happen to just have an Elgato Cam Link here on my desk. So essentially what's happening is that the Raspberry Pi is using its camera input to capture HDMI, and then uses, I think it's an MPEG streamer library, I forget the name exactly, to encode that incoming video signal and then display it out to us in the web browser for us to look at. So let's see if I manage to fix my DNS this time. No. No, I didn't. What have I done wrong with my DNS? This isn't a Tailscale problem. This is an Alex problem. Let me just SSH to something and see if I can remember what I set up, because my brain has gone to sleep right now. Oh, I see. Right, I need to put the IP address. Of course, I'm in a VLAN. I'm in a VLAN. That's why. So I need to put 37.254. Yeah, that'll work now, he says. All right, let me reboot again. It is always DNS, fried eggs. Yep, you are completely correct. It is always DNS, except when it's NixOS not compiling properly. That's also a common thing that I've been running into this week. So what I want to do as soon as this host boots, the keen-eyed amongst you might have noticed I've got a couple of hosts here all ready to go. Clarkson and Hammond. I want to build myself a little Proxmox cluster over here and configure Nextcloud with Docker on top of it inside of probably an Ubuntu virtual machine, although I don't know if we've got enough time left on the stream to install Ubuntu at this point. Let's see if this works this time. Hooray! All right, so I can show you actually one of my favorite little getting started with Proxmox scripts. So those of you that are in the Proxmox ecosystem have probably heard of this guy before, T-Tech. He writes a bunch of scripts here over at, well, whatever this link is, I'll put it in the chat for you. And if you are a Proxmox power user, then these scripts will save you so much time. I used to have a bunch of Ansible roles that configured things like the nag screen removal and the enterprise repository removal and that kind of thing. But now I just use these scripts. So one of the really killer features of PyKVM is being able to copy and paste text directly into the console of the remote machine. So you can see here, for example, I'm just pasting a bash command straight into the remote host, and it says you're going to paste 92 characters. Are you sure? And then I can press enter, and I can literally execute that script as if I'm sat in front of it on the remote host. Except it's not working. Why are you not working? Are you just here to troll me? Let me just wget that script directly onto the host. It's amazing how many ways things can break on a live stream. I run this command. It must be multiple times a week whenever no route to host. I guess that must be a DNS caching issue. I'll reboot again. Clement writes in that I used the Docker LXC script a few hours ago from the Proxmox helper scripts. Yeah, there is so much stuff in here. You've got LXC cleaners. You've got processor microcode update scripts. Tyler's gaming channel. I will be honest, I've been busy setting up this live stream this morning. I haven't listened to Linux Matters yet, but Martin Wimpress is I hope he doesn't hear this. Is probably one of my personal heroes. I got to meet him this summer in England. He's from my hometown in England, funnily enough. And we went to the pub and had a good chat about all sorts of stuff. A lot of Nick's talk, to be honest. So I'm going to give that episode of Linux Matters a listen. Probably after the stream, I'll go for a walk and take the dog out for a walk and give it a good listen. Because whilst I'll make no promises to do a video about Tailscale and Caddy on a podcast episode I haven't listened to yet, if it's Martin, it's probably quite worth the investigation. So watch this space, Tyler. Thank you very much for writing in. What other podcasts do you guys listen to, by the way? We're always looking for new stuff to pick up and sponsor. I mean, we sponsor a bunch of stuff over at Jupiter Broadcasting. Obviously, full disclosure, I do a podcast over there called Self-Hosted with Chris Fisher. We do Linux Unplugged. We do Linux Matters, Late Night Linux, 2.5 admins sometimes, depending on the quarter. We've done some stuff with the Accidental Tech podcast with Casey Liss and John Syracusa and all those guys. They are... Apparently there's an error in the boot process on my... Oh, yeah, there's something to do... The error is the ZFS import service on this host, I think. I don't think that's anything to do with what's going on here. There is something going on with my DNS, and I don't know what it is. All right, well, I see that Tyler, you followed up with saying it's only a brief mention of his Tailscale Caddy setup. He doesn't go into details. I will reach out to Martin on the back end and give him a little slap around the ears and say, "Oi, you, tell me what you're doing." What was I talking about? Podcasts. Yeah. So we've done Accidental Tech podcast over the last few episodes. Let me know what kind of stuff you guys listen to, because first of all, I'm a podcast junkie and I need more podcasts to listen to. But secondly, you know, if we can find out where you guys are hanging out, then we can actually support those creators in creating independent media and all that kind of stuff, which is a cause that's near and dear to my heart. Particularly, it's like it's like supporting open source in a way that the software we use is really important, of course, but so is the ecosystem of discovery around all of that stuff, like the media outlets behind it. You know, YouTube has given us so much in the realm of just an endless stream of content to look at. But these days, we're just kind of spoilt for choice. So anything you can do to help me narrow it down, I would be very appreciative. All right, so let's jump back to the screen share for a second. Tony wants me very desperately to look at the journal, and I really don't see a whole bunch going on. It's all green, Tony. It's all green. Tyler asks, have you heard the Self-Host cast? It's made by the same person that makes the Self-Host weekly newsletter. Yes, Ethan and I released a This Week in Self-Hosted episode last week, We're only going to do the one for now, I think. I think he's found a new host. Just some creative differences between he and I. So we're not going to continue that with me involved anyway, but there is a new show coming over there from Ethan, I think, in the near future. I'm also probably, and this is a Tailscale video, not an Alex video, but I'm also probably going to be stepping up the KTZ systems side of things. So a couple of my YouTube side of things with maybe some more news and I don't know. Like you see what Paul's Hardware does with his weekly news and Gamers Nexus for things like PC hardware. I quite like the idea of doing that for software side of things. So watch this space. Okay. What is going on over here? I'm going to give up on the third node for now because the joke was going to be I've got Clarkson, Hammond and May, but I'm just going to have to deal with Clarkson and Hammond for now. So I'm going to create a cluster in Proxmox. If you've never done this, it's actually really straightforward. So I'm going to go down here and go to the data center up here in my Proxmox view. Click on cluster up here and create cluster. I'm going to call this cluster Dunsfold. I'm sure you can see the naming the naming convention here. It's incredibly sophisticated. I'll come to some more questions in just a minute. And cool. So what Proxmox has done behind the scenes is it started a few services that we need to create the cluster. And now we've got the join information. This is the bit that I need to paste into the other nodes now to add these nodes into that cluster too. So I'm now connected via the web console to the second node in my cluster, Hammond it's called. If I go again to the cluster tab and click on join cluster, I'm just going to paste in that join information over here and then type in the root password and then click join Dunsfold. It's going to request the joining of these two nodes together. And in fact, if we go back over here, we should see that Hammond comes online any second now. And in fact, I think, even though the DNS seems to be a little wonky over here, I should be able to get to... Do I even have local network? Yeah, all right. I really genuinely don't know what's going on with that third node then. All right, so we've now got a cluster here with two nodes in it. So first thing I probably want to do is create a virtual machine. So I'm just going to call this one Stig. Very original. I have an ISO image here downloaded of the Ubuntu Linux Live ISO. I'm going to leave all of this stuff as default. I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes left. We're probably going to run out of time, aren't we? But why not? Why not jump through some Proxmox stuff, huh? 4 cores. Let's give it 8 gigs of RAM. Network. Yeah, boom, boom. Okay. So we're going to create that virtual machine. That all looks good. Jerome writes, May is always behind and slow. Yeah, that must be it. I should probably just nickname the node Captain Slow rather than May, shouldn't I? Okay. Let's start the virtual machine up and just get the install of this Ubuntu server instance going in the background whilst I'm chatting to you lovely people. All right. What has public GV got to say? Hi there, I had a node with subnet routing enabled 192.168.1.x. Can I connect to that IP directly without using Tailscale while I'm directly on the LAN? Will it connect through Tailscale only? Yes, you can connect to it both ways. However, you might run into a situation as you get a little more advanced where you end up... how to put this? If you have two subnet routers on the same LAN, you might end up in a situation where you have... trying to explain it and read the chat. Let me jump into my GitHub because I know I have an Ansible role there that solves this problem for people. Where is it? Is it just in my info repo? It might be. roles. Is it Tailscale fix? Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All right, so in this task just here, you'll see that I'm installing a custom systemd service using the contents of this template. So let's jump into this template real quick and take a look at what's going on. You can see here that when I restart this particular service, sometimes you end up in a situation where you've got two subnet routers on the same LAN. The IP tables rules, or the routing rules, the routing tables, don't know where to send those packets when you're connecting to the local IP address of that box. As soon as you enable Tailscale, as soon as you do a -- accept routes on a Linux box, this is. So sometimes you might find it necessary to add manually the priority of your LAN subnet to be more important than the Tailscale subnet, so that that local LAN IP interface IP is still routable on your local network. I suspect this is a level or two above the question you're asking, but just in case you ever run into this particular issue, then it's a solved problem at least. This one bugged me for like 6 months until I actually got the right engineer and chewed their ear off for long enough before they told me what was going on. And now I have an Ansible role here, which should hopefully help you get it fixed. So the answer is yes, you can access it both by local LAN IP address and also Tailscale IP as well. Okay, what else do we have going on? Can I SSH the machine? Here we go. Okay, so Jitendra asks, can I SSH to the machine? There's not quite enough words in this question for it to fully make sense, but I'm going to kind of extrapolate here. Can I SSH to a machine from the public internet without the Tailscale VPN on port 22 as well? So the Tailscale SSH functionality is running a custom SSH server on top of Linux, on top of OpenSSH. So it's possible to have Tailscale SSH and OpenSSH running on the same system at the same time and authenticate into both of those SSH servers separately. The Tailscale SSH server will reuse your Tailnet's identity to prove you are who you say you are. So you can never worry about SSH keys again, just simply by virtue of being on the Tailnet. That will be enough of an identity check for you to be authenticated, really identified, to say it's you. If you want to just use typical IDRSA SSH keys or ED25519 SSH keys, then also you can do that too, but you still need to have a publicly routable IP address and the firewall rules open for port 22, all that kind of stuff. So there you go. I think that's the answer. The answer is yes, and in this case, no, it depends. Hooray. So Jewel writes in, for podcasts. Oh, no, I'm clicking in the wrong place. For podcasts, I listen to the Ask Noah show. It's a small world, isn't it? I met Noah fairly recently. He and I go way back. Obviously, he was on the Linux Action Show with Chris, my my co-host for Self-Hosted, many years ago. But yes, the Ask Noah show is a weekly radio show that Noah does up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. If you've never met Noah, he is one of life's special treasures. And there's no sarcasm in what I'm saying there. Like, genuinely, I don't know where he gets his energy from. I think the guy has 3 or 4 kids. And he's always himself 100% charged and ready to go. It doesn't really matter what time of day it is. Really lovely fellow, and if you are in the world of Linux, you probably know Noah Chalaya already, but if you don't, Ask Noah show is a really great Linux podcast too. Thanks for the recommendation, to Jewel. Alright, so Tyler writes in, hey Tyler, that Tailscale's only available as a community add-on in the Home Assistant OS, which prevents me from interacting with Tailscale directly on the command line in HAOS. Is this a known limitation by the team? So, this is potentially a bit of a thorny topic. We have a pretty good relationship with the Home Assistant crew. I've talked myself to. I've had Paulus on my podcast a couple of times, and talk with Frank fairly regularly actually about this specific topic. And the reason that we don't have Tailscale in the base Home Assistant OS is because they want to keep it modular and not support one commercial company or even any commercial companies over another company. So other VPN providers in this space, for example, wouldn't get special treatment either. Other mesh VPN providers. And so the idea there is by having it as a add-on, you can pretty much replicate 95% of the functionality that you need. If you need things like Tailscale SSH on your Home Assistant instance, I would actually query whether you're holding it correctly, to reference a Steve Jobs quote. I can't think of a situation where I need to SSH directly into my Home Assistant box. What I would probably say at that point is create. I can show you my Proxmox cluster where I'm actually running my Home Assistant. I'm running my Home Assistant OS as a virtual machine, and then this way I can just get to the front end from anywhere. I appreciate not everybody will want to run their Home Assistant as a virtual machine, but even if you're not, you could have a PyKVM in front of it and then SSH into that, install Tailscale directly on the PyKVM. Let me see if I can bring that up for you, and then you're able to connect directly into the interface of any device. But where it gets, for me at least, on this basement PyKVM, yes, I have two in my house. I have one in my desk, because I am a firm believer that every nerd should have a PyKVM or a Nano KVM or some kind of KVM on their desk, because then you can, rather than have to have a spare separate keyboard and mouse and monitor and all that kind of stuff lying around the whole time, you can just plug something into the USB port of that Raspberry Pi or whatever it is. But in my case, I've got a KVM switcher down in the basement, so I can actually interact with up to 8 different systems from this single PyKVM instance. Now, I got this idea from Techno Tim. It's nothing original to me, but highly recommend this if you are in that world. Tyler follows up with a really good follow-up question. Where's my mouse gone? I've lost it. Lost my mouse. I've literally lost my mouse, people. Oh, I see. It was captured by PyKVM. Tyler writes a follow-up. As a note, this applies to HOS using the Home Assistant yellow hardware. Okay, that's a pretty good point. So in that regard, what I might suggest is running. They have an SSH add-on? They have a bunch of add-ons as part of Home Assistant anyway. Yeah, in terms of SSHing using Tailscale SSH into the Home Assistant OS, it really is. It's kind of like an Apple-like way of thinking about a Linux box. Is the HAOS? It's a package. It's packaged up, and they make a bunch of decisions for you and say, "Here's Home Assistant on a plate." The batteries are included, but you don't get quite as much granular control. And I think that's just the trade-off you're making by running HAOS. I'm afraid. So, it's just the way it goes, I'm afraid. There isn't really a good answer because of the way that the Home Assistant OS is architected. It's not a bug. It's not a problem per se. I understand the concern you're raising, but it's just the way that the Home Assistant OS has been architected. So I've probably got about 5 more minutes before I get out of here. If you have any more questions, please throw them in the chat. And if we need to go a little bit longer, we can do, just to make sure that they get answered. But we've been going for an hour now, if you can believe that. And I'm having a hoot of a time with you guys. This is fun. Okay, so Bramble writes, do you mostly run VMs or containers? Well, you can see here, it really depends. So Deep Thought is my primary AMD EPYC system. So this is the one that has all of the CPU horsepower and GPUs in it and stuff. Like I have a NixOS virtual machine, for example, that has an NVIDIA graphics card, which I then put on my tailnet. So if I want to run Whisper models or Image or Ollama or whatever, I can just connect to that from anywhere on my tailnet here using this Nix Llama node. And these are all virtual machines. I've got a bunch of Tailscale development stuff I use in all of my YouTube videos too. But when it comes to Neo, this box is running on. There's a video on my KTC YouTube channel talking about the Lenovo small form factor box that I use as my firewall. Well, I used to use it, and now I've switched out to a UDM Pro anyway. The answer indeed, Dovey, is 42. In fact, my subnets all have a 42 in them, just as a little homage to Mr. Adams, indeed. So you can see here on this node, because it's much smaller resources, rather than being an AMD EPYC, it's only, air quotes only, an i5-8400T CPU. But it's running fairly slowly, so it's got 6 cores, but they're fairly low clocked, and it's a T variant, so really I want to try and keep the resource usage on this one fairly minimal from a CPU perspective. So Home Assistant's running as a virtual machine, but then everything else here, Caddy, Tailscale, NetBoot, AdGuard Home, Searching, which is a self-hosted Google search engine alternative, by the way, which is awesome. If you want to search for anything, I can wholeheartedly recommend that you give Searching a look. You don't have to go to Google anymore. You've got a fully self-hosted, untrackable set of searches here going on. It's fantastic. I'll do a video about Searching at some point in the near future. Okay. Clayton writes in, and I do hope I said your name correctly, sir. I have containers with Docker Compose, Traffic, and Orthalia. I want to use Tailscale so devices on the Tailscale network skip Orthalia authentication. Can Tailscale be integrated in this scenario? I don't know. I would imagine so, because we've got a bunch of header stuff. But Tailscale, Orthalia, let's see what comes up. Yeah, there you go. Read the documentation. I haven't ever done this, full disclaimer, but it looks like it looks like here that Orthalia is acting as an OIDC provider for Tailscale. So that's going to need a bit more research on my part before I can give you a proper answer, but probably take a look at this page and let me know if that covers it off for you. I'm not sure if it will with regards to like application authentication. This is more about Tailscale authentication proper. So maybe a topic for a future video. All right. That's quite a complicated one. Ted writes in, is there anything exciting on the roadmap for Molvads integration? I'm interested in more shortcut options on iOS, preferred servers, etc., and also the ability to cycle IPs when a site blocks me. I don't know. I think we added Molvad now, getting on for must be about a year ago. I don't know of anything specifically coming down the pipeline. It doesn't mean there isn't anything at all. If you do have questions or concerns like this product feedback, you could open a GitHub issue and feed it directly into our product teams that way. I know they're monitoring these chats now in the live streams too. So if you do have some real pain points with the products, let us know in these chats and it will get back to them. But the answer for this question is not that I'm aware of, but thanks for the feedback. Yalex writes in, I got scared off from setting up a Tailscale subnet on my Proxmox host because when I tried, it affected resolv.conf on all of my containers. Is that normal? Yes, in fact, we actually have a support article about it, I'm pretty sure. Proxmox resolv.conf Tailscale. Yeah, here you go. There's a whole section of the resolv.conf within an LXC section of the Tailscale knowledge base, which I'll put a link to on the YouTube chat for you. Take a look at that. That should answer most of your questions. But essentially, the short version is that Proxmox itself writes its own DNS configuration into the LXC containers. If Tailscale is installed and Magic DNS is enabled, Proxmox will write that config into the containers resolv.conf. You can, as you can see here, there are 2 ways to mitigate this behavior. You can configure Tailscale without Magic DNS. I probably wouldn't recommend that unless you have a very good reason. Maybe this is a good enough reason. Or you can create a file of /etc.pve-ignore.resolv.conf within each LXC's file system that will tell Proxmox not to overwrite the resolv.conf file inside the LXC. Another option, of course, is to just manually specify the DNS for your LXC. So you could, for example, go into here in DNS and just manually, as I've done here, just manually specify your domain name and your DNS servers. So there's really 3 ways to work around that one. The 2 in the documentation, plus also the big hammer of just manually configuring it yourself? Thanks for that. It's a great question. I think this is probably going to be the last one. I have Tailscale set up on a TrueNAS scale, probably, and I'm having trouble scanning some home automation controllers for BACnet devices. What's a BACnet device? I have no idea. Does anybody in the chat know what a BACnet device is? Building automation and control network. All right, so if it's running on UDP, then it's most likely going to be some kind of a, dare I say, a multicast issue. Like I really don't know anything about BACnet. I would love it actually if you would send us a support ticket on this one and just mention my name, Alex, in the ticket, and that way the support engineer can fill me in on the details of what's going on here. Support@tailscale.com. It's free. It's free support. Best effort, of course, but we tend to get back to people pretty darn quickly, even on the free tier. So I think that'll probably do us for today. I am certainly, my voice will probably not do much more than another few minutes. So some plugs before we get out of here. We're going to be in Raleigh fairly soon for All Things Open. I mean, I live here, of course, but we're going to be at All Things Open. And if you're going to be there, you can enter our raffle to win this wonderful, wonderful NASA Lego space shuttle. Drop by the booth at All Things Open in Raleigh. It's in, I think it's the week after next, actually. Come and let me know and say hi that you saw this on the live stream. Got some other swag and stickers and stuff, which I thought I had at my disposal, but I don't know where they are. What else do we have going on? Webinars. You can check the Tailscale website for upcoming webinars, that kind of stuff. Of course, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you get to see more of this lovely mug. And I really just want to say a big thank you very much to everybody that showed up in today's live stream. I had a lot of fun. Some really great questions, and you can always reach out to our support teams. We also have a pretty active subreddit too if you need more support over there as well. And I suppose that leaves me only one thing left to say until next time, thank you so much for watching. I've been Alex from Tailscale. Ciao for now.